Hello, Creative Food students. This is my first time recording my voice over notes that we would normally do in class. So we're going to see how this goes. Hopefully it's not too boring, and you always have the option to mute me and go through kind of the notes as I click through them if you don't want to hear my voice, which I don't blame you if you don't want to. So here we go. You will find this note sheet attached to Google Classroom. So if you want to print it out ahead of time to follow along, you're welcome to. What I'm going to ask you to do is answer some questions at the end of these notes. So don't feel like you have to take the notes. You're not going to be turning them in. They'd be just for you to kind of help with your learning and understanding. So if you want, you can pause now. Print this off if you're able to, so you have that note sheet. Otherwise, you can kind of just follow along. Like we did with our Cornell notes, all of the red text, so like why do we need vegetables, that's on your paper. And then the blue is the suggested information to write down. So why do we need to eat vegetables? The reason why they are on the My Plate in one of our food groups is that they provide us with carbohydrates, and that is our energy source. So from taking like a walk around the block with your dog, or if you're going to run a half mile, you're going to need some carbohydrates to keep your energy and your cells going. Carbohydrates are really plentiful in roots and seeds, and we're going to talk about vegetables that fall in those categories. They also give us fiber. Fiber is what aids in our digestion. So we have to have fiber in order to have the food that we eat move through our body and then easily come out the other side. And I think you know what I'm talking about there. They are also low in fat. So we eat lots of other foods that contain saturated or unsaturated fats, but vegetables is not one of those food groups. They give us vitamins, and they also give us minerals like calcium, iron, and potassium as kind of some big heavy hitters there. There's also something called phytochemicals in vegetables, and these help protect cells from damages by substances known as free radicals. So what that means is if our body as it ages, per se, starts to have cells develop that aren't kind of their mutated cells, vegetables help with protecting that mutation. And if mutations are bad and our body can't figure them out, it can lead to cancer. So I'm not saying that vegetables are a cure to cancer, because they aren't. And if they were, I think we would all know to use them and eat them a lot. But it just helps protect our cells, like giving it like armor against weird things that can happen as our bodies start to age and things like that. So if we were in class, I would ask you to flip to the back of your notes where you would see a little info kind of graphic. It is provided on Google Classroom. If you want to take a look at it, you can, but otherwise just follow along. We're going to go through categories of vegetables. So different parts of plants provide us with different categories of veggies, and let's take a look. The first one we're going to look at is the fruit category. So let me read the definition and then explain. So the fruit of the plant appears after the flower, and most contain about 80 to 90% water. So you'll notice the picture on the screen is a tomato. Often when I teach food groups, like to my 6th grade classes, there is this huge debate that starts at every table about what's considered a fruit and what's considered a vegetable. And the tomato is always the most argued about when it comes to that conversation. Some students will swear up and down that a tomato is a fruit, while other students say, no, it's not, it's a vegetable. So let me put it to rest here. When you're talking about the botany of a plant, so botany is the study of plants, there are many, many vegetables that are called the fruit of the plant, meaning it appears after a flower. But when we talk about food groups, we're talking about like flavor profiles, foods that like when you were to cook them all together or make them, you would say, yeah, that's more of a vegetable. So continue with my thought process here. If I was going to make a fruit salad, pineapples and apples and strawberries, are you going to go throw in tomatoes or maybe zucchini into there? I know that I wouldn't, because that doesn't sound very good. So when you guys are thinking about food groups, think about flavor profiles. And when we're looking at these category of vegetables, I am going to reference that tomatoes and cucumbers and squash and eggplant and peppers and pumpkins, they are all called the fruit of the plant because they appear after that flower. If you've ever had a home garden or gone to a farm and you've seen these kind of plants grow, like this, especially like zucchini, they have these big yellow orangey flowers that grow out of the plant. And then behind that flower, give it a couple like days or a couple weeks, you will see this zucchini start to sprout behind it. And then that flower gets old and it shrivels up and it falls off. And then what you have is your zucchini or your squash that you can pick and eat. So the fruit comes after the flower. It has seeds on the inside. It has all those things that you've probably learned in other classes. But tomatoes and cucumbers and pumpkins are definitely all vegetables because, again, think back to making your fruit salad. Are you going to throw some pumpkin into your delicious apples and oranges? I know I probably wouldn't. All right, let's move on. Flowers. There are vegetables that we eat that are actually the flower of the plant, and one has flower in its name, and that's cauliflower, as well as broccoli. So the flower of the plant, which is usually high in water and low in carbohydrates. What farmers do is they cut broccoli and cauliflower before it has a chance to flower out. But if you were to let broccoli continue to grow, what would happen is all of those green little like tree tops, my kids call it like broccoli, those little mini trees. If you let broccoli grow out, all of those little tree tops would turn into these yellow and white flowers. So what we're actually eating when we eat cauliflower and broccoli are the buds of a flower before they have a chance to mature and become flowers themselves. So now you know that you're eating some flower buds when it comes to broccoli and cauliflower. Stems. So category of vegetables that are stems are things like celery, asparagus, and rhubarb. I know I have mushrooms on there, but we'll talk about those in a minute. The stem of the plant, and these are usually high in water, low in carbohydrates, but are very high in fiber. Think about eating a piece of celery. When you eat celery, you're eating the stem, and when you bite into it, do you know how like you get those like strings that come across, like when you bite into it, those strings are left behind? That is a clear example of plant fiber. When we chew up that celery and we swallow it, that part that is stringy, we can't even digest it like with our stomach acid. So it travels into our intestines and then it kind of goes and it cleans out like our entire intestines and then helps move any body waste out of our body. So fiber is key to kind of keeping the food that we bring in, moving it through our body and getting it out of our body. The reasons why mushrooms are on there is it's kind of a gray area. We do eat the stems of mushrooms, but we also eat the top of mushrooms. And mushrooms actually fall into a category of like fungi. So they're their own little like species that are separate from kind of traditional plants that we're talking about here. Rhubarb, which is mentioned, we eat the stem of rhubarb. And those of you who've had it before know that it kind of has this really tart, almost like bitter taste to it. And we tend to throw rhubarb into sweet things. So we kind of team it up with a fruit like strawberries or raspberries to get kind of that sweet and tangy pie or like a cookie or a bar. Let's move on to seeds. This is the part of the plant that can be planted to produce more vegetables. So when you eat peas, you're eating a seed. If you eat corn on the cob, all those little kernels of the corn could make more corn plants. So if you take a look at that pea pod that I have in the lower corner, you can see the peas sticking out of the pod. If those were to fall out, like the plant grew, the peas were never picked, then they started to dry out on the vine. Once those peas came out of the pod and they fell back to the earth, they would stomp, like maybe somebody walks on top of it and that seed gets buried into the ground. That little pea would then sprout a whole new pea plant. Same thing with corn. Imagine corn in the field. If it never gets harvested, those corn cobs will dry out because the plant will start to die. Birds will come along and they'll peck at those little kernels on the cob. And then those birds basically help release some of those kernels back down to the dirt. And then that gets covered up and a whole new corn plant would grow. So it's kind of crazy to think about it. But as you're eating corn on the cob, you're eating a bunch of little tiny seeds. Leaves. When we think about vegetables, we often think of leaves. We think of salads, right? So leaves are high in water, low in carbohydrates. The darker green a leafy veggie is, the higher source of vitamin A and other minerals that it contains. So examples are things like spinach, kale, lettuce, cabbage, and Brussels sprouts. If you look at the kale, which is the middle picture or the middle leaf in that picture, you'll see that it's super dark. Right next to it to the left is an example of like spinach, which also comes in like different colors and can be pretty dark. The darker green it is, the more vitamins and minerals you're getting from it. So then if you imagine like iceberg lettuce, which is like a lot of salads are made with iceberg lettuce, that tends to be really pale green. When you bite into it, it almost feels like it releases some like water out of it. Iceberg lettuce does not have nearly as many vitamins or minerals as like your dark leafy greens. So it's good to get like a mix or a variety when you're putting a salad together so that you're getting all of those benefits. Next category is tubers. This is a definition. It's a portion of an underground stem from which new plants may form. It is very high in carbohydrates. So examples of common tubers are potatoes and like sweet potatoes. So notice that they're not a root, they're a tuber. And I love saying that word, tuber. What they are is they live underground, right? They grow underground. And it is a portion of a stem. So think of it that way, not much different than like the celery we talked about, except for that celery grows above ground, where potatoes are growing below the ground, and they like to grow where it's nice and dark. So tubers, different from roots. So let's talk about roots. These are usually underground. They absorb water and minerals, and it's what anchors the plant into the ground. So our common roots are carrots, beets, turnips, radishes, and parsnips. So if you take a look at the beets that are in that picture, you can see those little like hairy roots shooting out from the bottom. Same thing with carrots. When we buy them in the store, they've been kind of scrubbed clean, but all along the carrot root, or the part of the carrot that we eat, it sends out these little tiny like hairs as additional roots that are holding it into the ground. If you've ever pulled carrots from the earth, you'll notice that they're kind of hard to remove because they have all of these roots like keeping them in there. Whereas like a potato, if you go and you dig for potatoes, they remove pretty easily from the ground because they're not actually what's anchoring it into the ground. Whereas a root is what's anchoring that plant into the ground. Bulbs, as our next category here, is a short underground stem consisting of layers or cloves that are wrapped in an outer paper-like skin. So what is the one thing we learned from watching Shrek? Anybody? You know? It's that onions have layers, right? So if you take a look at that bulb of that red onion cut in half, you can see all of the layers that make up that onion. Same thing with like a clove of garlic. It's not layered the same way as an onion, but those little individual cloves have like that papery skin that kind of surrounds it like the outside of an onion. So onions and garlic are bulbs. They're a short underground stem, right? So they're not a root, they're a stem. And they do grow underground, and they send like little green stems above ground. And you can see that on that garlic clove, how it has those little green shoots coming out. And then at the very bottom of the onion, you'll see it on the yellow onion. Those are those little roots. And remember when we talked about dicing an onion, how you didn't want to cut off the root end because that's what's holding that whole onion together. Let's move on to how many servings do you need a day when it comes to your vegetables. So you're flipping back over to the front side of your notes now. And this is where your notes will become a little bit more tailored to you. So taking a look at this, it's divided by females and males and different age groups. Depending on like if you were born male or female, your body needs certain amounts of these food groups. So I would say for most of you guys, you're falling in like that 2-cup range, maybe going to 2.5 cups. And the reason why like older males get up to 3 cups is because usually their bodies are bigger by that point. You're growing, so you're going to need a little bit more in this food group. So it says write down what applies to you. Okay, moving on. So what is a serving? If I say that you need 2 cups, well, what does that actually look like? And on the side there, you're going to say it says pick 3 that you actually eat. So if you're following along and taking some notes, you could be writing this down. 1 cup of raw or cooked veggies, or like a vegetable juice is 1 cup. So if you imagine taking one of like our measuring cups, like we used like when we measure out flour, and you filled it with like a cup of carrots or a cup of broccoli, or you really pushed in the spinach like we did for our creamy tomato spinach pasta, that's going to equal 1 cup of your daily serving. And I'm actually going to So now I'm actually going to go back on what I just said. So you guys remember how I told you to really pack that spinach for the creamy tomato pasta? That's because if you don't pack it, you're not going to get that full cup benefit. Because if you look at the next one, it says 2 cups of a raw leafy green equals 1 cup, right? Because When you really pack it in there, yeah, you're going to get maybe a 1 cup ratio. But if you're kind of lightly packing it, like some of you did, you're not going to get all that benefit. 1 cup of baby carrots is roughly counting out 12 carrots. And if you eat 2 large stalks of celery, which are roughly like 11 to 12 inches long, that would also count as 1 cup of your vegetables. Okay. All right. Okay, now I couldn't get it to move forward. Here we go. Buying fresh vegetables. This is kind of a funny thing to be thinking about right now because I know that a lot of us can't get to the grocery store. But in non-COVID-19 world, the best time to buy your vegetables is when they're in season. So what that looks like is in the grocery store, you know when produce is in season because usually there's an overabundance of it and they put it like at the front of the store. So if you think about the fall, what is like big and orange and sitting out like in front of stores and like right when you first walked into the produce section? It's pumpkins, right? Now, if you fast forward to say later in the season, you might see a ton of variety of these from like red to green to these pink colored ones to yellow colored ones. You're going to see that in the fall, apples are in season, right? Because that is when they're most plentiful. It is the peak of the crop for farmers. So our grocery stores get filled with all of those produce items. But here in the States, we live with a global market or global kind of infrastructure. So we can get watermelon and mangoes and bananas and strawberries and different types of vegetables year round because we're getting them from other countries, other parts of our own country that can grow these things year round. And so we're always having an overabundance of selection, right? But when you want to buy different produce is when it's in season because what it looks like is it's at the peak of its ripeness. So it's going to be the most flavorful. It's going to be the right size. It's going to taste the best. So that's kind of when you want to buy things is when you're seeing a lot of them. So knowing when fruits and vegetables are being sold seasonally is important. And I have a picture coming up of what that looks like. So if you look at this, in the fall, beets, bell peppers, carrots, cauliflower, kale, lettuce, pumpkins, and squash, those are all really in season. And if we take a look at the diagram, as we head kind of like right now, we're in this like winter phase. So is Colorado producing a bunch of different fruits and vegetables? Not really, right? Because it's too cold. But you'll see like in May is when asparagus kind of pops in and they have like beans that grow all year, corn grows all year. So there's definitely products that Colorado has that we can have all year long. But Colorado, being that we have snow during the wintertime, we do rely on other parts of our country supplying us with our fresh fruits and vegetables. So storing vegetables, once you get them home, you want to store ripe, unwashed vegetables in your fridge. It's best to hold off on washing your fruits and vegetables until you're ready to use them. Now, this is all before having to deal with COVID-19. Now you do want to make sure that you're washing that produce before you bring it like into the home and to use it, just to make sure that it's as safe as possible, especially the surrounding packaging of any vegetables that you bring home. Then you want to place in bags or veggie drawers to retain their moisture and crispness. If they get like their leaves of lettuce get too damp for too long, they will start to go bad faster. So kind of drying them off after you've washed them. And then you have exceptions. Tomatoes and avocados would prefer to live out on your counter than going into the fridge. They ripen up a lot better on the counter. And then potatoes, onions, and squash, they also prefer a cool, dry place that is not your refrigerator, so like a pantry. Or think about it, potatoes and onions grow under like the ground. So they're used to it being very, very dark. So the kind of the darker, the drier the place you can find, like inside a cabinet even, or inside your pantry is going to be the best for those. If you're going to prepare your vegetables, wash them under cold running water, give them a nice rinse. You can use hand brushes to clean off your firmer vegetables that can like withstand that, like your potatoes and carrots. And then when you're cooking, you'll get the most nutritional benefit if you leave on their skins, because the skin on most vegetables is edible, and that's where all the fiber and nutrients tend to be. Leave pieces as large as possible, again, to preserve some of those nutrients. Steam or use small amounts of water. If you steam cook your vegetables, you're going to retain more of those nutrients. If you boil them and you cover them with water, you'll notice that like your broccoli, if you boil it, you'll lose a lot of the nutrients because the water turns all green. So you just want a little bit of water in there just to kind of steam them with like a lid on top. Avoid overcooking because what happens is it changes their color or makes it really mushy. And most people don't like really mushy vegetables. They like them to have a little bit of a crunch to them. And like it says, cook only until tender or like crisp. All right, we've made it through these notes. If you are following along on that note sheet, this would be where you would write a quick little summary, reminding yourself of what you learned about vegetables. If you followed with notes or you didn't, which was optional, you are going to have some questions you'll need to answer about vegetables that was pulled directly from this PowerPoint. And then I will also be posting a recipe search that will focus on veggies. So thank you guys for listening. I made it through my first note session here without having you guys to ask questions or kind of help me make them more exciting. So I hope I didn't bore you too much. And we'll have more of these to come. I hope you guys are doing all right. Bye.